how did you shift from performing to art history and interest in documenting art history?
Well, before, I mean, I was already studying history before I started learning Bharatanatyam. So I had a history of classical ballet, but that was purely hobby. And so, yes, what does a young person do? You have to make a choice and study something. And there was at that time, there was no IT or something. So I might have been interested in IT stuff if it had been already existing, but that started only like 20, 25 years later. So I was interested in ancient civilization and in the history of humanity. And in a way, it was a spiritual interest. But of course, that interest was not fulfilled in university. I was quite disappointed with the kind of knowledge university had to offer me. But yeah, I mean, I was 18, 19 years old, and you choose a study. And the argument was that I could also become a teacher, which never happened. But, I do have a teaching degree also. So, and only when I was in my study for about 3 to 4 years, I came across my Bharatanatyam teacher, my guru. So, and Bharatanatyam in general. So, yeah, it was always already there. And my guru was a fantastic lady who was one of the great dancers of her generation, but she was not an intellectual. So I am an intellectual. So I started asking questions that she couldn't answer. And so I went to the university library. We had at the time, very famous Indological Institute in my university. I studied in Utrecht, and there was the Indological Institute that was just, I think he had just retired in that time, but it was the Institute of Professor Honda, who is one of the great, rather famous Indologists. I don't know, have you heard of his name?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was his institute. There were other famous Indologists before him. I mean, Holland was quite famous for Indology for about 100 years, for over a century, but that's all gone. And that is, yeah, I can say probably mismanagement. But the last great Indologist that we had was Fritz Staal, of course, and he moved to the States because there was no way to do his thing in Holland. There was no money, and but yeah, you have to lobby, huh? And these people, they were just doing their book stuff. And anyway, there was a very big library, and so I started reading academic books, and that was quite frustrating because the India that I came to know through my guru and learning Bharatanatyam was a very different place from the India that the academics wrote about. And that created some confusion for about 10 years, I think. Who would be right, my guru and the arts and the people I met in India, or these academics who were intelligent people, held prestigious posts, wrote books. And after about 10 years, when I started working with my Dikshitar, my conclusion was it is the academics who are the ones who haven't got a clue what they're writing about because of their preconceptions.
So how do we have we reconciled this difference to some extent through your work?
There's no reconciliation. I mean, Indology has got stuck in the Aryan invasion theory, which is a bullshit story, in my humble opinion. And I think we're going to find that out, now Indian people doing the research themselves, and people who are not sort of like, I never got a PhD because I know they won't give me a PhD in the academic world because I cannot support the Aryan invasion theory. There's no proof for it. And in everything that I have come to know about the Indian civilization counters it, contradicts it. There is no conflict. There is no conflict between two civilizations which absorb bits and pieces from each other out of conflict. There is no conflict within the Indian civilization, within the whole setup of Agama, Veda, temple, even tribal traditions, all the layers of the Indian civilization are basically in harmony with each other. You know, it is all from the same root. It is from the same sense of spirituality, taking different shapes in different ages, in different parts, for different reasons, but there is harmony. I find harmony there and not conflict. So I mean, as long as all the research, anthropological and historical research in the Indian civilization is predicated on the Aryan invasion theory and a concept of a conflict between an invading culture and an existing and an indigenous culture, we're not going to find out anything really. But so that was my conclusion now, something 30 years ago, 25, 30 years ago, somewhere in the early years when I just started spending more time in Chidambaram with my Dikshiter family. And at that time, there was no proof, there was nothing. So later I found the work of Dr. Frawley, and there was at some point, there was a research a study on the Saraswati River done by Indians, you know, so that began the whole process of, you know, so what was an intuition is now something that can be supported. But when I first had that intuition, I had no proof.
How did Raja Dikshitar ji, what was his specific area of work that got you?
Well, in his generation, he was, I think, probably the only Dikshitar who spoke English. He had studied English literature in university. He had a BA in that had come about with his life was a lot of struggle because he was very different, both from the other Dikshitars and also from the Indians of his generation. He would have fitted in with your generation, but he didn't fit in with his generation. So he at that time, he was the only Indian I had ever met who asked why. Why is my temple like this? Why do we have this tradition? Why is the ritual like this? What is behind it? And he felt that there was science behind it, that it was not a superstition. And that is what attracted me to him. That is what we had in common, you know, me from this question about, you know, from the academic literature versus the art. And he had, because he was speaking English, he had for about 10 years, he had supported and connected with all kinds of people who had come to Chidambaram. And that was just students and seekers and devotees and, you know, Western people who spoke English, people from outside Tamil Nadu, and also with a whole bunch of academics. So quite a few you know, there are a few books that were written around that time. That was Paul Younger's book. Raja worked for Paul Younger for 6 months, every other day, a couple of hours. And the book was basically more or less written on the Dikshitar's information. And he had also a lot of contact with David Smith, who also wrote a book about the temple. And he had contacts with people who wrote articles. He had, you know, a wide academic circle. Everybody ended up with him because, you know, we're speaking here about the 70s. We're speaking about the 70s and early 80s, and or late 70s and first half of the 80s. I met him in about 88, 89. I'm not good at dates. And by that time, he was terribly frustrated because all these people, they would work with him and praise him. They wouldn't pay him, and they would go home and write their book and forget everything he had told them. So, I mean, so there was a lot. They had the court case, and there was this perception. I mean, these academics, everybody kept challenging the Dikshitar assertion that their temple is a Vedic temple, Advaitic, and not Agamic, and that it is a different doctrine, and that it is more ancient than more or less every other temple tradition in South India. And you know, they would go home and he would give them the information, and that supported also his, because like I said, he asked why. So he would not publish something if he had not at least 2 independent confirmations of his vision, his insight. So like a lot of the things that he was working on have never been published because he didn't find the support, because in that time there was no internet archive. If we needed a book, we had to go and visit the library and make a photocopy. And, it was a very, very different time. And so that was very slow. So a lot of things got stuck on just not having the resources to dig deeper. So what he had is what his elderly dictators had taught him, and what was available. And sort of around the time I met him, he just had decided he didn't want to work with these academics anymore, and he wanted to publish his own stuff and do his own research. And he didn't trust them anymore. He was very angry, very upset. Rightly so. Like, for instance, Paul Younger, he doesn't even mention Raja in the acknowledgements. He has put Raja in a note in chapter 2, while Raja worked for him for 6 months. And the book, Paul Younger came back to Raja 2-3 times because there were errors in his book, and Raja had to rectify it. So, it was really this, I hate this word, the informant, these academics, they come, they know nothing, they're kindergarten, they're stupid. And they come and they go to the great scholars and artists of India, and they pretend that they sit at their feet, and they write everything down, and they go home, and then they call these great scholars informants, and they put themselves above them as though they are police officers who use these people to, anyway, so one of my frustrations. So I never did that. I never wanted to do that. I'm part of the Sampradaya. That's what I want to be. I hope I am. Well, anyway, I'm responsible only to my gurus and to my parampara. And but I don't fit in with this attitude. I can never have a seat in academia. So, and I don't care. It's okay. I don't, yes, maybe it would have been easy to have a job and to have resources and stuff like that. And the Raja's life, my life, our life was very struggled. So we did far less than what we set out to do. So then Raja decided, so he wanted to decode his temple, and then he decided to concentrate on a few elements that were kind of sort of very eye-catching, like the Sphinx. So he did his project, he focused on the Sphinx, and he did a lot of work there, and we got that published, and he was able, to make it his own. And because he hadn't told any of the academics about it, and he was very happy. He said, at least I didn't give them that, So he shared his knowledge freely, and they all promised to pay him later, and it never happened, of course. So he was. Yeah, that is so. When I came to him as a Sisha, and I stayed as a partner, and I have no regret having shared that life with him. And my only regret is that he's not there anymore, because an enormous body of knowledge has disappeared, because he used to listen to the old Dikshitars. In his generation, when nobody was. I mean, that was already starting in his generation. And, he was so frustrated also with the Indians. Nobody listened. Nobody was interested. And then when the first people came, like Vijay Kumar, who started having an interest in the tradition, who started blogging, that's the time he passed away. So it is just sad. That's all. So I have a little bit of his knowledge, just, and I do my best to give it a shape.
What can we do from here, Liesbeth? What is there, how can India help to, support your mission and his mission? Is there something?
I think you should. I mean, you have as your heritage, as part of your being, I mean, this is what happens, you know, when somebody is in the middle of something, you don't see the beauty, you don't see how special it is, you don't realize how unbelievably great a treasure it is. So then it kind of takes people like me who come from outside and said, come on, you know, there isn't anything like that anywhere in the world. Of course there is. We have the Mayans, we have the Egyptians, but all those civilizations are dead. You know, the the flow of the knowledge has been cut off. So there is no oral tradition left, or very little, only sort of, you know, dust specks here and there that you have to gather carefully and that are difficult to interpret. And in India, that river is not yet completely cut off. Yes, it's been damaged. Yes. I mean, dams have been built and lakes have been created. And so, I mean, but you guys, you are there and you can go to the banks of that river and you can dip your toes in. And there are so many there are so many of these rivers. So yeah, I mean, India is such an unbelievable treasure of things that 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 you can learn from, and that you can, you know, the basic idea is that the temples, the rituals, the mythologies are not superstition. It is not it is also important not always to take it literally. You know, it is code, and it is code on many layers. Like there is this astronomical layer, but astronomy again reflects the yoga, reflects the teaching about consciousness. And for me, when I think about India, it is difficult to choose, you know, where to start. So yeah, like Raja chose to pursue the subject of the Sphinx, because of course the Sphinx connects to the other ancient civilizations, Greece, Egypt, Mesopotamia. So, you know, at that time, India was not recognized as an ancient civilization at all. I mean, Aryan invasion, 1500 BC, Vedas composed 1200 BC. You know, it is, and the fact that these academics, I mean, my experience of academics, that if you look at the history as a historian, you know, when you look at academia, when these people believe something, it's a belief system. It's only partially science. It's mainly a belief system. So people believe something, and then they, you know, they die out. You know, like even Darwinism. You know, evolution has been such a challenge. You know, there are still people who believe in the Adam and Eve story, and those are belief systems. And of course, Sanatana Dharma is a belief system, but it is a belief system that in its essence has a scientific outlook, the only thing is the interest was not to understand materiality. The main interest was to understand spirit, consciousness. So the objective was different. On the other hand, I've also looked into the history of the beginning of the colonial period, through the work of Jacob Hafner. And you can see even in 1800, India was the most advanced, richest land on the planet. Yeah, and 150 years later, it was exhausted. I think the British left because there wasn't anything left to steal. Partly, they still have this enormous idea of themselves, which is basically based on being thieves and thugs. So, yeah, okay. But so I come to India to learn.
What about the world of art? Lisbeth? You come from the world of dance,
Yeah.
and do you see this reluctance to go very deep into art history and among
I
artists themselves?
I don't know. I don't have much contact with the present day art world. I have a few contacts, like I have contact with Jitendra Hirschfeld because we are from the same guru, and he's doing very deep research. But then, of course, he is also half outsider, half insider. I don't know. I think there are lots of different people. I'm very hopeful about the younger generation. I mean, at least people are asking why. Swarnamalia Ganesh has done a lot of work, and I'm waiting for her to publish it. So already a couple of years. Hello, Swarnamalia, when is your book out? um, and yeah, it there is always this balance between the individual path and the path of the society and the path of humanity as a whole. I mean, we are now a humanity as a whole. We are not bits and pieces anymore. We are all interconnected. That is a miracle that has happened in the past 30 years. And it's never been like that before, at least not in our memory, not in our historic memory. I, I personally think that it is likely that there were more ancient layers of human civilization from before the ice ages, and that traces of that can be found in the Indian traditions. And because there is a continuous oral tradition in India, it is more likely that we can find the reflections and traces of that through the Puranas more than in other parts of the world, because there is a continuous oral tradition. And oh, I
You've also
lost.
the first hand the role of the Dikshitars and
Yeah. Oh, you
the
were asking me
Archatas also.
about
So
you asked me about artists, and it is a personal quest as well as um, a communal quest, and these things interact. I mean, like, what I did was my personal quest, and I'd like to share the fruits of my personal quest, but in the end, it's my personal quest, and um, yeah, I'm just seeding. I'm just a gardener who's seeding, who's putting out seeds. And I mean, as an individual, we don't have a grip on what we cannot even influence other people. We cannot change them. We can interact with them. And of course, people do interact and have influences. And I'm sure there are countless dancers out there doing their thing and to the best of their ability. And well, yeah, I mean, there's always I think there's always also the cosmic push. Life itself has this cosmic intent, the intent towards higher consciousness. So yeah, I'm just one drop in that. I'm just one speck. Okay, please continue.
what are your thoughts on the role of the Dikshitars in preserving this
Yeah, who else?
traditions?
Have you got any idea what on a personal level, on an individual level, what a sacrifice it is? I've lived with my Dikshitar for nearly 25 years with his family. And basically, he didn't have a life because he didn't walk out. So, of course, they have a great pride in it, and they have a great connection. But as an individual, they have no choice in partner. They have no choice in career. They have it is there are some sad things happening, like Raja often complained, often no with a sadness. He said, in my father's generation, every Dikshitar was a scholar. So every Dikshitar had a kind of real knowledge, something. Didn't matter what, something. And I don't think, I mean, even in his generation, there were no scholars, not, except him. There was one person who was a professor. I don't know if it was his generation. That was also an elderly person. Of course, a lot of the youngsters went to university, but they went and studied engineering, the usual Indian stuff, engineering and things like that. I don't know if there's any scholars, but I have no contact anymore. I mean, after Raji passed away, I took care of his family for some time, but for personal reasons and my illness and everything, I had to step away from that. So at the moment, I don't have any personal connection. So I don't know what is happening now. I mean, I'm grateful to the Lord that they won the court case, but I'm worried about the future because, um, you know, if they do, I know a lot of them, they have a modern family, you know, like they have just two children, and that is not enough to preserve the community. And the yeah, I think this modern life would be a challenge for them as a community, you know, a lot of temptations, and I don't know what will happen, but it is an enormous sacrifice on a person as an head individual is basically uh, scrapped, you know, for the service of the tradition. And Raja was an individual. Raja was he had a Western mind, but he, even from his Western mind, he you know, by birth, by just his how he was. That's why he asked why. He asked why. Why is the Gopuram like that? What does it mean? Why is the ritual? Why the timing? Why the calendar? Why the everything? He asked why. He wanted to know. And I don't know if there's anybody else after him who's asking why or doing anything with that. And yeah, if he had walked out, if he had really walked out, you know, he never walked out. I mean, I know there's people who think he walked out. He never walked out. He lived his Dikshiter life, whether he was in the West or in India. So he never walked out. So he never had that freedom. You know, I mean, I can decide whether I do Madhi Achara or not. He didn't have that choice. He was the Dikshitar. So he followed the tradition. And that is a trend that demands, you know, I often see these discussions and these books about how terribly the Brahmins suppress the outcast and stuff like that. Yes, definitely on an individual level, people do horrible things to each other, but that happens on every level. The Brahmins among themselves do horrible things to each other, and other communities do horrible things to each other. And but to be a Brahmin and to keep that achara and to do that from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed, and you know, always be conscious about that, about the 1,001 things you are not supposed to do and have to do. It's I don't think anybody would volunteer. I think if anybody had the choice, they would volunteer. Yes, a few might, you know, like people become monks, like people dedicate themselves. But in general, people wouldn't volunteer to follow a real Brahmin life. I don't think so. That's a big misunderstanding. And whatever injustices that have happened, and of course they have happened, there are also injustices that, I mean, towards the individual to do the Brahmin life, and especially to do it the Dikshitar way. That's a terrible sacrifice. So that's my personal insight in this.
I think it's a very fair and accurate.
I, well, okay, thank you.
What does Chidambaram mean to you when you reflect back? Do you have any anecdotes or memories,
Yeah, well, yes,
special
yes, because
memories?
what happened was, um, so I was I was still a history student, because of my doing the Bharatanatyam side by side with my study. I took a couple of years longer than I should have, and thank God at that time that was still possible. So I came to Chidambaram with partly an academic interest, and I had heard about Padma Subramaniam's research, but it was published much later, and I wanted to see the Karanas because I was interested. You know, I did quite a bit of research into that subject, although I didn't take that much further. You know, what I had learned, and people would say this is a Karana or something. And anyway, so I wanted to photograph the Karanas, and I came to Chidambaram on the third trip with my guru to India, and we stayed with what's her name? Oh, the great Natuanar. I heard she has dementia now. I forgot her name. Great lady, diction, Devadasi lady. I'm bad at names. I'm Indra, Indra Rajan. We stayed with Indra Rajan, and I had class with Indra Rajan, and my guru and Indra Rajan, they had a fun time because they did girly things together, and sort of we stayed in her house on the top level where what she rented out in a few small rooms, and we had a lady cooking for her, and so I wanted to go to Chidambaram, and so one day we took the bus and we went to Chidambaram, and we went to the government bungalow. You know, they had the from the tourism department, they had the government guest house. And we went, so we left Madras early, and there were narrow roads, and the driver on the bus was falling asleep half the time, and it was sometimes quite terrifying. And so we arrived in Chidambaram, and then 4 o'clock, we were told 4 o'clock the temple would open. So we went 4 o'clock, we went there, and that time there was all this, now there's all these in the court. It was just after the 1987, so it must have been 1988 or 1989. It was just after the great Abhishekam, Kumbh Abhishekam, the previous Kumbh Abhishekam. So everything was neat and clean, and there was not yet all this building in the courtyard, in the prakara, in the outer prakara, you know, after the gopurams, between the gopuram and the temple. You have been there, I suppose. So now there's all this, they have all these pavilions and coverings and pillars and stuff that was not there. So we stood near the door, and there was only just a little bit of shade, and it was January, but it was quite hot. And then 4 o'clock, the bells rang, and they opened the doors, and I crossed the threshold. And when I stepped my first foot on the first of the 21 steps, I had this unbelievable emotion overcoming me, this spiritual experience that was, I can't put it into words. Coming home was part of it, and just the ananda was part of it, just the pure joy coming home. And I started crying. I started, I couldn't stop crying for at least half an hour, maybe longer. And so my guru, she was a tiny lady. She was smaller than me, and she looked at me like that. And, you know, but she was a great lady. She was like a second mother to me. So we walked down the steps, and we walked there a bit, and she said, "Are you all right?" And there was a dikshitar there, and he said, "Oh, you can go to he sent us to the Nirta Sabha." So we sat there, and I cried a bit more. And then when we were sitting there, because then we understood that the Sabha was not open yet, that would open only 5 o'clock. And then at some point she said to me, "Liesbeth, would you like to dance here?" You know, and okay, white girl from Holland. So is that possible, Akka? Is that even possible? Come on, let's go. I'm going to ask permission. So she went to the secretary room, and she got the permission. And then we went to Tanjore, where we went to her master's house, and accidentally Master Kitapa Pillai was her master, and accidentally he was home for just a few days. So we met the master, and he referred us to some musicians, and we took the musicians back to the temple, and I danced for the Lord. And yeah, that is, I met Raja Dikshitar years later, but that was my connection. That was and is my connection. So
it's
and that emotion has never left me. That even, you know, like I even, like, there was the temple festival was going on, and I was here, and I had this terrible diagnosis, and I felt his dance. So that connection is part of me. You asked something about dancing in the heart, you know, you asked about the Murti, but the whole temple is built to reflect that the Lord dances in the heart. And that goes back to the Upanishads. I don't know where. I mean, maybe if I get the time and the energy, I should write an article about that, because it is a very profound doctrine. And that's why the two sabas have been built, and the two steps are there because they're like the chambers of the heart with the blood flowing in and out. And it is about the Chitra Sabha, the Chit Sabha, and Chitra Sabha, that has to do with that there is a space in the heart where the Akasha is, and that is from the Upanishad. I don't know, Taittiriya. I have to, I don't remember stuff like that. I have to look it up, but I did read it all and I researched it all. And so the whole doctrine is based on the Upanishad. And the Chidambaram temple is based on one particular Upanishad, and it's anyway, it's Advaitic. And that's why the Dikshitars wear the kudumi on the left side, because it reflects their female and male half are one. So, and that's why also Parvati is always, she's always with the Lord dancing, and she will give the rhythm. So there is this, I think there's much more to it, but I haven't had an opportunity to go into the texts. But I'm sure there's much more to it.
Wonderful. It's amazing, and I also loved reading all of your blogs.
Okay, thank you.
Because it gave, wonderful to see a very different insight and perspective. There's the physical aspect of the temple that which itself is very attractive.
Yeah.
I think we
but
just
I think it is attractive because they apply these kind of sacred geometry rules. I think the measurements, the pramana, everything reflects this, sort of embodies it. Like just in you asked, there was one of the questions there, I like one of the reasons why these murtis are so attractive and why the temples are so attractive is because it reflects this cosmic truth about phi and pi, sacred geometry, pramana, ratio, and in different ways. So that's why different temples have different energies, and the ancients knew that. They knew how to do that. And because we have some text, but we lost a lot of text and we lost the oral tradition, so we are kind of half groping in the dark. And then at some point, I know when people do a ritual because their ancestors did it, and then one day, especially in this day and age, people will wake up and they think, why am I doing this? And then if the why hasn't got an answer, they will drop it. And that's what's happening. That's what's happening. But we can find the why. We can find the why, but it takes time. It takes patience. It takes dedication. It's a kind of yoga. It's jnana yoga. It is the yoga of seeking the knowledge, the truth. But the question why has an answer, I'm sure. And people, I sometimes see, or even the Indian heritage enthusiasts said, the fancy of the artist and stuff like that. There was some space for the fancy of the artist. That's why we have different styles. But things like pramana, there was no fancy there. Like the layers in the base and the layers in the body of the temple and the layers in the roof and the relationship. It is not absolute measurements. It's the relationship between one part, the other part, and the parts with the whole that generates this energy, that generates this feeling of, this is so beautiful. That generates the healing, that generates the spiritual activation of the mind, that we are in awe and that we go home healed after we visit the temple or after we participate in a ritual.
So the creativity of the individual was in some which the West actually celebrates.
Yeah,
is slightly subsumed here, where
no, not just slightly. Quite. On the other hand, if you look at the different styles, if you look at the Pallava compared to the Chola, compared to the various phases, you can see that even in the dance, I know, like you learn this. And it is like that in all the traditions in China, in Japan, even in the Middle Ages in Europe, by going through the rules, by absorbing the rules and sort of becoming one with the rules, creativity can go to a new level. But it's not about the individual. And in the West, this split that has come, I mean, like, and There is one person especially responsible for this, and that is Newton. Newton was also an alchemist. Originally, Western science was also spiritual, like up to Newton. So a lot of these people who are part of the first scientific revolution, like Giordano Bruno, um, these alchemists, these Renaissance alchemists, they were also spiritual. They were looking for God, basically. And Newton, he was the greatest. Somebody has called him the greatest alchemist. And at one day, he took all his alchemy books and he put them away and he never looked at them again. And then he started the Royal Society. And then spirituality became split from science. And because of that, they have got the advantages, the kind of progress, but they lost something important. And I think there are two possibilities. Either he decided he couldn't find it, or he found it and he didn't want to share it. And because alchemy is also about sort of find the truth of life. It's the knowledge of life. It's about the amrita. It's about it's about the philosopher's stone, and the philosopher's stone is about making gold, but it's also about eternal life, about not dying. So, like I said, he either found it and he didn't want to share it, or he thought it was too dangerous to share, or he didn't find it and gave up and got so angry that he split off that aspect from science. And he sort of, so after that, science all becomes about technology, because whole Western science, nobody realizes that. Everyone says science. Western science would not have been possible without technology. The technology came first. It started with lenses. It started with glass, and it started with making lenses to make microscopes and telescopes. So it started with technology. Until today, all this kind of so-called progress is based on the technology that makes it possible to see deeper or see further or see in a different way. It's all about measurement. And we lost the soul, we lost the spirit. And the thing about that, the danger about that is that when we lose the connection to the soul, is that we lose the conscience to do wrong. So science is all the time being weaponized. Like you can't imagine yoga. You can't weaponize yoga. I mean, yes, people can become better warriors, but you can't weaponize yoga. You can sell it a bit, but you can't weaponize it. So, and when somebody has a raised consciousness, you get more awareness and you get more conscience, not just consciousness, but also conscience. And you can't harm people. You can't do what the Nazis did if you're really spiritually awakened. And you can't harm another person. You can't hurt. You can't, because you feel it yourself and you wouldn't do it. That's the Ashtanga yoga. One is non-violence. You don't hurt other people. You just don't do it. So, so if the spiritual conscience is a very important part of keeping science on the right track. And because after Newton, they lost that. So it's only about science, progress, and it's being weaponized all the time, of course. So it's individual. You have a gun. Do you use it to defend yourself? Do you smith it and make it a plow, or do you shoot another person? It is, in the end, it is our responsibility. And if you take your responsibility serious, which I think is slightly more likely when a person is aware of Dharma than when a person only thinks about his bank account or about his fame in the world or whatever, I don't know. I know terrible things happen in India. I think people do horrible things to each other. I'm not blind for that. On the other hand, it is the civilization that gave us the concept of Dharma. So everybody in India knows what Dharma is. Whether they keep it or not is a separate matter. But at least the awareness is there. At least you can speak to people about it. I mean, you can say, okay, is this really the right thing? Should you do this? Think about it. Is this your dharma? You can ask a person. And Western science, yeah, what they have conscience, of course. And I mean, we have Christianity. Most people are raised still here in the West, basically within a Christian civilization. But I don't know. I mean, science did get separated from spirituality after Newton, or in the 17th century, and I think that was not a good development. Yeah.
How does being engaged with this tradition help you to deal with life itself, Lisbeth?
Yeah.
You're going through
In what way didn't it help me?
especially now. Does
Yeah.
it, how do we explain suffering and, the early demise of Raja sir? And
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
do we, I understand whatever you're saying, but how do we justify suffering in his life or the difficulties and,
Yeah, that's our individual challenge, eh?
Mm.
To I've been thinking a lot about that, of course, again. And I mean, I had my own suffering, completely separate of the things we talk about. There was a lot of suffering in my life, and I think there is in everybody's life. And I think that is the individual's challenge. And as a jiva, we we have to heal ourselves, and connecting to our soul, connecting to the way our soul is connected to the cosmic consciousness. I think that is a way to heal. And I think art is crucial in that, especially also drama, even just movies. I think I've lost you, Aparna. Aparna? Okay, I'll just continue. You had dropped a bit, but I think I lost your sound. I've lost. Aparna, I don't hear you anymore. Your mic is off. Your No, your mic is off. Your mic, you have to activate your mic. In my screen, I see
Sorry.
yeah. Okay. So
Yeah.
where were we? Yeah, I think art, theater especially also, but all art is very important to heal. And we can heal each other, by being kinder, by having more understanding. But I think the first challenge is to know ourselves. That's Advaita. Know thyself. Nothing else is worth knowing. And that takes more than one lifetime. So yeah, I mean, living is a challenge, and dying is a even greater challenge, absolutely. And it's terrifying, the whole idea. And I mean, we have lots of stories about that. So I mean, we are with 7 billion people now, and each of us has to face it. So I think we can learn from each other, and we can learn from ourselves, and know thyself. Nothing else is worth knowing. So and dying is part of that. And I think I'm confused a bit, or all these myths that are about the amrita, about not dying, about the eternal, the drink of immortality, and of course the whole alchemy, which is about trying to procure that, and the mythologies about the stalas, where the Akasha Ganga or the Akasha Saraswati comes, and then the Amrita is present there. And I wonder what that tells us. But I think it's not a physical immortality. I think it's a spiritual immortality. And but it is a mystery. It's also something that I ask why. I did a lot of work about the eclipse, the things that have to do with the eclipse and the Amrita. So I wonder whether I don't think I would want to live eternally in this one body, on this planet. So I don't, I think I would get very bored at some point. And I think other people would as well. So I'm not quite sure. I think it is the fear of death that makes people pursue it in a sort of, immediate fashion. But I can understand that, although I think it's futile. And I don't think we learn anything from that. I think it's about learning more than anything else. But also to me, of course, it's a mystery. I'm just a human being. I'm just one person. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Lisbeth. Wishing you well and
Hmm.
our prayers always. And
Thank you.